The humid, late August air clung to everything, thick with the scent of pine and something vaguely floral, a deceptive sweetness that masked the encroaching rot of summer's end. Eli shoved another duffel bag into the already overstuffed minivan, the worn fabric snagging on a stray piece of plastic. It was more than just a car. It was a metal sarcophagus crammed with the Vance family's condensed existence. His dad, Richard, stood on the driveway, arms crossed, a posture that was less about supervision and more about asserting dominance over the meticulously organized chaos.
"Make sure the cooler's got enough ice, Eli."
Richard's voice was a low rumble, a familiar frequency that grated on Eli's nerves. It always felt like a command disguised as a suggestion.
"It's packed, Dad,"
Eli grunted, slamming the rear hatch shut with a little more force than necessary. The minivan, a trusty if aging beast, groaned in protest. He could already feel the familiar tension building, the invisible current that ran between him and his father, a static charge that had been crackling for years, intensifying as Eli's departure for college loomed. This trip, this forced familial bonding expedition, was supposed to be a final, desperate attempt at equilibrium before he broke free. Sarah, his mom, emerged from the house, a floral print sundress a stark contrast to the muted tones of the minivan's interior. She carried a wicker basket, a hopeful offering of homemade cookies. Her smile was a little too bright, a little too brittle.
"Got your snack, sweetie?"
she said, her eyes flicking between Eli and Richard, her peacemaker instincts already on high alert.
"Thanks, Mom,"
Eli managed, taking the basket and carefully placing it on the passenger seat, careful to avoid the precariously stacked bags. He caught Sarah's eye, a brief moment of understanding passing between them. She knew. She always knew. Lily, 10 years old and perpetually brimming with an energy that seemed to defy the oppressive heat, burst out of the house, her bright yellow backpack bouncing against her spine.
"Are we going now?"
She chirped, her voice high and clear, like a bird call. She clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit, its button eyes staring blankly ahead.
"Almost, Bug,"
Richard said, his gruffness softening for a fraction of a second as he looked at Lily. It was one of the few cracks in his granite exterior.
"Just gotta get everything settled."
Eli watched them, a detached observer even in his own family. Richard, the stoic patriarch, his jaw set with an unspoken determination to control every aspect of their lives. Sarah, the anxious matriarch, her love a tangible force that often felt suffocating. Lily, the bright, unblemished innocence, a stark contrast to the world he was about to enter, both the college he was heading to and the one they were currently trapped in. And himself, Eli, teetering on the precipice of adulthood, convinced he knew more than anyone, yet utterly clueless about anything that truly mattered. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar worn leather cool against his skin. The dashboard was a cluttered landscape of old maps, a half-eaten pack of gum, and a small, chipped Virgin Mary statue Richard insisted on keeping for good luck. Eli plugged his phone into the auxiliary port, the mundane act of selecting a playlist a small rebellion against the impending forced march of conversation. He chose something loud, something with a driving beat, a sonic buffer against the encroaching silence. Richard slid into the passenger seat, his presence filling the space with an almost palpable weight. He unfolded a thick, topographical map of the region they were heading into, his finger tracing imaginary routes.
"We're gonna make good time if we stick to the interstate for the first few hours,"
he declared, his voice resonating with an air of finality.
"Then we can take some of those scenic routes. Saw a brochure at the gas station yesterday. Said there are some incredible overlooks."
Eli nodded, his eyes on the road ahead, the asphalt shimmering in the heat. He'd learned long ago that arguing with Richard about routes or schedules was a battle lost before it began. Richard believed in his own navigational genius, a stubborn faith that bordered on delusion.
"Can we stop at a place with a waterfall?"
Lily piped up from the back, her voice muffled by the pile of blankets and pillows she'd created for herself. Sarah turned to her, her smile regaining some of its genuine warmth.
Maybe, sweetie. We'll see what we can find.
The minivan pulled out of the driveway, a slow, deliberate departure. Eli glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a final glimpse of their suburban house, the neatly manicured lawn, the life he was leaving behind. It felt like a lifetime ago already. He shifted into drive, the engine a low hum, and eased onto the street, the journey officially underway. The first few hours were a blur of highway hypnosis, the landscape unfolding in predictable patterns of strip malls, fast food joints, and endless stretches of cornfields. Eli's chosen playlist provided a constant, insistent soundtrack, a wall of sound that kept the conversational hum to a minimum. Richard would occasionally point out a landmark, his voice tinged with a self-satisfied air, as if he were the sole architect of the passing scenery. Sarah would offer up observations about the cloud formations or comment on a particularly outlandish billboard. Lily, content in her nest of blankets, would occasionally let out a contented sigh or a whispered question about a passing truck. Eli found himself zoning out, his thoughts drifting, the rhythmic beat of the music a steady pulse against the mundane reality. He thought about his dorm room, the freedom of it, the anonymity. He'd spent months meticulously planning his escape, packing not just clothes but a carefully curated persona. The detached, cool college kid, the guy who didn't need anyone.
You know, your grandfather used to take us on road trips like this,
Richard said, breaking the comfortable silence with a rumble that jolted Eli back to the present. Eli braced himself. These were the moments Richard liked to delve into familial lore, the unspoken comparisons, the subtle criticisms of Eli's own perceived shortcomings.
Yeah?
Eli replied, keeping his tone neutral, his eyes fixed on the receding highway.
Used to say the best way to know your family was to be stuck in a tin can with them for days on end.
Richard continued, a faint smile playing on his lips.
He was a wise man, your grandfather. Knew a thing or two about people, about men.
Eli felt a familiar prickle of annoyance. The implication was clear. Eli was not measuring up to some idealized patriarchal standard. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter.
I think we know each other pretty well, Dad.
He said, the words carefully chosen, devoid of any confrontational edge. Sarah, ever the diplomat, interjected.
It's nice to have this time, though, before you go off to school, Eli. A real chance to reconnect.
She squeezed his shoulder from the passenger seat, a gesture of comfort that Eli half resisted, half accepted. Richard grunted, the sound a dismissive punctuation mark.
Reconnecting is good, but it's more than that. It's about understanding where you come from. The Vance blood. It's strong, resilient. You gotta know what that means.
Eli chewed the inside of his cheek. He knew what that meant. It meant stubbornness. It meant pride. It meant a relentless refusal to show weakness. It meant a long line of men who'd buried their emotions so deep they'd become fossilized. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, the cornfields thinning out, replaced by denser forests. The sky, once a vast, unbroken blue, began to take on a bruised, purplish hue as the sun dipped lower. The air, too, seemed to shift, growing cooler, carrying the distinct earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves.
We're getting into the mountains now,
Richard announced, unfolding the map again. His finger jabbed at a cluster of topographical lines.
According to this, we should be able to take the Old Ridge Road. Cuts off a good hour, and it's supposed to be beautiful.
Eli hesitated. The interstate was predictable, safe. Old Ridge Road sounded like an invitation to trouble.
Are you sure that road's in good condition? It's not on the main GPS.
GPS doesn't know everything, Eli.
Richard said, a note of impatience creeping into his voice.
Your grandfather knew these roads like the back of his hand. This is the kind of driving that separates the men from the boys. You gotta trust your instincts. And the map.
Sarah fidgeted in her seat.
Are you sure, Richard? It looks pretty remote.
Remote is good, Sarah.
Richard said, his voice firm.
This is what a road trip is supposed to be about. Getting off the beaten path, seeing something new.
Eli felt the familiar tug of war in his gut. The part of him that craved adventure, the part that chafed under his father's constant control, wanted to take the detour. But the pragmatic part, the part that recognized his father's tendency to overestimate his own abilities and underestimate potential dangers, urged caution.
All right,
Eli said, the word tasting like a concession.
Old Ridge Road it is. Just slow down when we get there. And if it looks dicey, we turn back.
Richard gave a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of Eli's reluctant agreement. He seemed to see it as a victory, another instance of Eli finally falling in line. The minivan turned off the main highway, the asphalt immediately giving way to a narrower, cracked surface. The trees closed in, their branches arching overhead, forming a dense canopy that filtered the dwindling sunlight into a dappled, ethereal glow. The air grew cooler still, thick with the scent of pine needles and something else, something ancient and wild. The road ahead twisted and turned, disappearing into the shadowed embrace of the forest. The familiar hum of the engine seemed to deepen, to take on a more resonant tone, as if the very mountains were listening. The paved road dissolved completely, replaced by a gravel track that was uneven and rutted. The minivan bounced and swayed, the chassis groaning with each lurch. Eli gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Richard, unfazed, pointed ahead.
See that? That's the old logging trail. We follow this for another mile or so, and it should connect back to a proper road.
Proper road?
Eli muttered under his breath. This looked more like a deer path. Lily, surprisingly, seemed unfazed by the bumpy ride. Her face was pressed against the window, her eyes wide with a childlike wonder.
It's like a secret tunnel,
She exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. Sarah, however, looked increasingly anxious. She kept glancing at the dense wall of trees on either side, her hand resting on Eli's arm.
Are you sure about this, Richard? It's getting dark.
We'll be fine.
Richard insisted, his voice unwavering.
We're not that far from where it connects back, just a bit further.
Eli felt a growing unease settle in his chest, a cold knot that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. The forest seemed to press in on them, the trees ancient and gnarled, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. The silence between songs was no longer comfortable. It was heavy, pregnant with unspoken anxieties. He flicked his gaze to the fuel gauge. It was lower than he liked. They hadn't seen a gas station in miles. He was about to voice his concern when a sharp, metallic crunch echoed from beneath the minivan, followed by an immediate, sickening loss of power. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The vehicle lurched to a halt, the sudden silence deafening after the constant drone of the engine.
What was that?
Sarah's voice was a thin thread of panic. Eli tried to restart the engine. Nothing. A dead click. He pumped the gas pedal, the engine refusing to catch.
I don't know.
He said, his voice tight with frustration.
Something broke.
Richard, for the first time since they'd left, looked genuinely concerned. He leaned forward, peering out the windshield.
We're stuck, aren't we?
Eli nodded, his jaw clenched. He tried the ignition again. Silence. He looked at the fuel gauge. It was sitting just above empty. But the engine shouldn't have just died like that. Not without a warning.
It sounds like something underneath gave out. And the engine, it just died.
The last vestiges of sunlight bled from the sky, painting the dense forest in hues of deep purple and bruised indigo. The temperature plummeted, a sharp, biting cold that seeped through the minivan's thin walls. Eli shivered, not entirely from the cold. The silence that had descended was absolute, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the occasional rustle of leaves. The trees, once majestic, now loomed like silent, menacing sentinels.
We're miles from anywhere.
Sarah whispered, her voice trembling.
No cell service either.
She held up her phone, a blank screen mocking their isolation. Richard, despite the grim situation, still attempted to maintain an air of authority.
All right, no need to panic. We'll figure this out. Eli, can you see what's wrong with the car?
Eli opened his door, stepping out into the chilling air. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves was stronger here, thick and cloying. He walked to the front of the minivan, his flashlight beam cutting a weak swath through the encroaching darkness. He ducked under the chassis, his breath misting in the cold. He saw it immediately. A deep gash across the oil pan, a dark, viscous fluid oozing slowly onto the gravel. It looked like they'd hit something sharp, something substantial.
The oil pan's busted.
He called back, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness.
We're leaking oil. And I don't know if it's just that. The engine just died.
He stood up, wiping his greasy hands on his jeans. He looked around, the flashlight beam dancing nervously across the impenetrable wall of trees. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket pressing down on them.
We should have stayed on the interstate.
Sarah said, her voice laced with regret and fear.
Hindsight is 20/20, Sarah.
Richard retorted, though the usual bluster was gone, replaced by a grim pragmatism.
The fact is, we're here, and it's getting dark. We need to find shelter.
Eli scanned the immediate vicinity. Nothing but dense forest, the trees pressing in on all sides. He felt a primal urge to run, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. He took a deep breath, trying to push down the rising panic. Then, through the thick tangle of trees, a faint light flickered. A single, hesitant glow, like a dying ember.
Look,
Eli said, pointing.
is that a light?
Richard squinted, his eyes adjusting to the gloom.
It is. Looks like a cabin, maybe?
Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in the oppressive darkness. A cabin. A chance for shelter.
Let's go.
Richard said, his voice regaining some of its usual command.
Stay close.
Eli grabbed the flashlight, its beam still a meager defense against the growing night. He grabbed Lily's hand, her small fingers cold and clammy in his. Sarah clung to his other arm, her grip tight. They moved slowly, carefully, through the undergrowth, the faint light ahead their only guide. The forest floor was uneven, littered with fallen branches and unseen roots, each step a potential misstep. The air grew colder, and the silence seemed to deepen, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. The light, though faint, seemed to beckon them, a promise of refuge in the desolate wilderness. They pushed through a thicket of thorny bushes, the branches snagging at their clothes, and emerged into a small clearing. There, silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky, stood a cabin. It was small, dilapidated, its wooden walls weathered and gray, its windows dark and vacant. But the light, a single dim lantern, still flickered inside, casting long, dancing shadows. It was an unsettling sight, a structure that seemed to have been swallowed by the woods, forgotten by time.
Well,
Richard said, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced.
looks like we found our shelter.
Eli felt a prickle of unease. The cabin looked less like a refuge and more like a trap. It was old, run down, and strangely isolated. No smoke rose from the chimney, no sign of life beyond the flickering lantern.
Are you sure we should go in there?
Sarah whispered, her hand tightening on Eli's arm.
It looks abandoned.
It's better than staying out here in the cold.
Richard said, already moving towards the front door. He reached out, his hand hovering over the worn wood. He pushed. The door creaked open with a low, mournful groan, revealing a dark, dusty interior.
Hello?
Richard called out, his voice swallowed by the cavernous silence within. No answer. He stepped inside, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating a single unlit lantern sitting on a rough-hewn table. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid. The cabin was sparse, a table, a couple of chairs, a cold hearth. It was a lonely, desolate space, a testament to a forgotten existence. Eli stepped inside, Lily trailing hesitantly behind him. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from the cobweb-laden corners to the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling. It was eerily quiet, the silence punctuated only by the frantic thumping of his own heart.
Looks like nobody's been here in a while,
Richard said, running a finger along the dusty table. He then turned his attention to the door. Scrawled in what looked like dark, dried paint were crude letters. They formed a warning, a set of cryptic instructions.
These are the rules.
Eli read aloud, his voice catching in his throat. The letters were rough, uneven, almost primal.
Do not make noise. Do not look outside. Do not leave the cabin. Do not touch what is not yours. Break a rule, pay the price.
A chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature snaked down Eli's spine. This was no ordinary abandoned cabin. This was something else. He felt a tremor run through Lily's hand, her small face pale and wide-eyed. Sarah let out a small, choked gasp. Richard scoffed, though there was a tremor of something other than dismissiveness in his voice.
What is this? Some kind of prank? Locals messing with travelers?
He tapped the door with his knuckles.
Probably some kids trying to scare people.
Eli disagreed. The letters, the dried paint, the sheer isolation of the place. It all felt too deliberate, too unsettling to be a simple prank. This felt ancient, ingrained.
I don't think it's a prank, Dad.
Eli said, his voice low. He looked at the oil pan, the dead engine, the isolation. It was all starting to feel connected.
We broke down in the middle of nowhere, and we found this cabin with a warning on the door. Something's not right.
Nonsense,
Richard said, though he didn't sound as convinced as he wanted to. He walked further into the cabin, his boots crunching on the dusty floor. His eyes landed on a small, carved wooden figurine on a shelf. It was crudely made, depicting a twisted, hunched figure with sharp angles and empty, piercing eyes. It looked ancient.
What is this thing?
Richard asked, reaching for it.
Dad, wait!
Eli's voice was sharp, urgent. He remembered the warning.
Do not touch what is not yours.
But Richard, ever stubborn, ever dismissive of warnings he deemed superstitious, ignored him. His fingers closed around the wooden figurine. As he lifted it from the shelf, a low, guttural whisper seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin, a sound that was not quite human, not quite animal. The lantern on the table flickered violently, casting wild, distorted shadows across the room. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy, and a profound sense of dread washed over Eli, a primal fear that clawed at his throat. Richard had just broken the first rule. The price, whatever it was about to be paid.